Hello, everyone. This is Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn, and I am doing a very important strategic lesson on the pawn chains. And today, we're going to learn about the attacking pawn chain. Okay? This attacking pawn chain is very common for many openings. The way we approach this pawn chain is through the move order d4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, bishop g5. This is called the Tory attack. It's actually quite uncommon to get the pawn chain I'm about to show you from this opening. It's more common to get it from the French opening, but the idea is very, very important. After black plays the move d5, e3, c5, c3, you see white sort of creates this tiny pawn chain, b2, c3, d4. It's not quite as powerful as when the e pawn reaches e5. This is the truly attacking pawn chain. And in this game, black plays knight c6, knight bd2, and here black makes the first inaccuracy of the game. Black himself goes for the pawn chain with c4. At first, it looks like a very good idea. You have this beautiful pawn chain, you take away the d3 square from the bishop, but it's actually a mistake. And the reason is black weakens his pressure on the center, thus enabling white to create the great attacking pawn chain after the move e4. Now, if black takes on e4, white's simply going to take with the knight. This c-pawn is extremely weak, plus there's pressure against the f6 knight. Black's already in trouble. Because of the e5 threat, black's reply is more or less forced, bishop e7, and after e5, knight d7, bishop takes, knight takes, we have reached the thematic pawn chain that I'm about to show you. This is the pawn chain b2, c3, d4, e5. I call this attacking pawn chain the French pawn chain because black has a French structure with the e6, d5, c4. And as I said, you can get this pawn chain from many different openings. Let me just quickly show you how we can get similar type of position from the French defense. If we go all the way back, e4, e6, d4, d5, e5. This is called the advanced variation. And after c5, c3, this is the exact pawn chain white is going for. Now, the drawback in this specific case is that black did not commit the pawn to c4. As you will see, going back to my video, to the game I'm about to show you, with the pawn on c4, white's attack is so much easier because he no longer has to worry about pressure against the d4 pawn. So after logical moves, bishop e2, castles, castles, black tries to basically say, you know what, my pawns are pointing to the queen side. I'm going to try to attack this pawn, which is right next to the base, with the idea maybe a5, b4. And in turn, asking white, what are you going to do? Because you don't have the d3 square available for the bishop. So this is a very important concept, guys. White can play queen c2, but without the bishop, there is really no pressure against the h7 pawn. And my question to everyone is, well, what should white do? What's the best plan? So after the move b5, what should white do? And the plan is actually quite interesting. You don't really have time to play for f4, f5. It's too slow. For instance, knight e1, knight c2, knight e3, f4, maybe g4, f5. It is a thematic idea to attack this pawn chain, e6 pawn, but it's actually too slow. Okay? Instead, we want to attack the enemy king with our pawns. Rather, not with the pawns, but with the pieces. With the pawns, it's too slow. So why do we want to attack the king, first of all? Remember, when I teach you to attack with the pawn chains, you got to create an arrow from the base to the head of the pawn chain. It's pointing toward the enemy king. So the first part of the plan is you want to play on the king side. Okay, how do we get all our pieces involved? We want our bishop to be on c2. It will take some time. We want the knight to be closer to the enemy king. How can we accomplish these two goals? There's only one correct way to do that. It's the move rook e1. It's the best move in the position. Now the knight is ready to get regrouped, and the queen can go to d2, allowing the bishop to regroup to c2. Once you have the bishop on the long diagonal and the knight either on g3 or e3 where it can jump to g4, you have a full force of white's attack against the enemy king. And this pawn, especially the e5 pawn, basically makes it impossible for black's pieces, right, to come and help the king. These guys are pretty much out of the game for a long time. So how could the game continue? Well, in this case, after knight f5, knight f1, black played bishop b7, but we already know this is the bad French bishop, right, guys? For those of you who play the French, this guy is pretty much dead. This bishop has no future. It's actually blocked by the pawn. All right, so after knight g3, knight takes g3, h takes g3, it turns out that double g pawn actually help white's attack. Black played a5. Who can tell me why this is very helpful for white's attack? Well, the answer is quite simple. You have the h file. So if you said king h2, rook g1, followed by king back to g1, you're clever, and it's actually not a bad plan. But even better, it is to prepare the attack with g4, g3, king g2, and then the rook can swing to h1. But first things first, we need to get the bishop over to the long diagonal with queen d2. Now the bishop shifts over to d1, c2. We're not afraid of b4, obviously. Black played rook e8. It's a prophylactic idea to try to put the knight here and protect the pawn. White continues with his strategy. Knight f8, bishop c2, knight g6. And here, guys, comes the next stage of white's attack. Because of the h file, we really need to put our rook there. Therefore, g4 is best. And again, this bishop is like a big fat pawn. Our pawn chain is pretty much never going to be destroyed, and the attack is basically unstoppable. g3, king g2, rook h1, and then we can do whatever we want. We can double on the h file. We can try to induce h6 weakness, so we can undermine it with g5. I feel like black is already strategically lost. So in this game, black played somewhat dubious move a4. Probably he wanted to play with a3, but that's not how you attack the pawn chains, right, guys? I think b4 was still the right plan, because now white can completely stop black's counterplay on the queen side with a3. It turns out that that bishop will never get active because of these pawns. As a matter of fact, if you were to remove this d pawn away, the bishop would be quite happy, but you can't do that. So bishop c6, white just ignores that with g3. Queen d7, white ignores that too with king g2. And basically, as I mentioned, this attack is unstoppable. Here, black starts to panic with knight e7, with the idea trying to at least play g6, lock the bishop. We don't care. Rook h1. Well, g6 would be suicidal because now the queen comes in. How else can you stop pressure against the h pawn? Well, h6 is played in the game, but that is inviting a good old hook, right? This is pawn, this is a hook, and we can hang on to that pawn and open things up with a simple g5. Black cannot stop opening the files. So he tried this tricky idea, knight f5, g4, knight e7, g takes h, and g6. So he wants us to push the pawn and hide behind that. It's a defensive idea known as the shield, right? He's using our own pawn as a shield against the frontal attack. Unfortunately, though, for black, it's not going to stop the attack, because after h7, king h8, his dark squares are extremely weak. You guys can probably finish black off here with one move. All we need to do is to get our queen over to f6, and there's nothing he can do about that. So if you said queen f4, queen g5, you are exactly correct. In the game, my student played queen g5, and black resigned.
Hey, check this video out to make sure that you get more important information to bring your chess to the next level.